Blood dripped from the velvet cushions of the syndicate throne. I was just the plus-sized maid meant to scrub it clean, but Vincenzo Bruno clamped cold steel shackles around my wrists, anchoring me to his seat of power. Then the ruthless Don whispered the one name I had buried. Bianca Rizzo was a ghost trapped in a body no one bothered to look twice at, and that was exactly how she survived. Within the towering stone walls of the Bruno Syndicate compound in the Hudson Valley of New York, invisibility was a weapon. Draped in a shapeless, drab grey uniform that did nothing to flatter her soft, plus-sized figure, Bianca spent her days scrubbing imported marble floors and dusting antique chandeliers. To the lethal men who patrolled the estate with suppressed weapons under their tailored suits, she was part of the furniture. They looked past her wide hips, her rounded cheeks, and her quiet demeanor, seeing only a slow, unremarkable cleaner. They never noticed the sharp, calculating eyes that tracked their patrol routes, memorized their security codes, and catalogued the serial numbers of their shipments. Bianca had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being unnoticeable. It was the only way to stay alive when you had a bounty on your head and the ghosts of a slaughtered family haunting your nightmares. She kept her head down, her voice soft, and her secret locked away in the deepest vault of her mind. But hiding in plain sight meant she had a front-row seat to the darkest corners of the underworld, governed by a man who ruled with absolute, merciless authority. Vincenzo Bruno was the Don of the Bruno family, the undisputed king of the East Coast Commission. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out custom Italian wool, Vincenzo was a force of nature that sucked the air out of any room he entered. His eyes were the color of shattered ice, cold and impenetrable, and his hands were stained with the blood of anyone who dared question his reign. He was a monster wrapped in wealth, a man who spoke in low, dangerous tones and demanded absolute loyalty. And lately, Bianca could feel the weight of his icy gaze lingering on her just a fraction of a second too long. The tension in the compound had reached a boiling point with the arrival of Lorraine Sterling. Lorraine was the polished, venomous heir to the Sterling crime family out of Boston, an organization the Brunos were currently forced to negotiate with to secure the northern ports. Lorraine was everything Bianca was not. She was razor-thin, draped in haute couture, and possessed a cruelty that she wore like expensive perfume. Lorraine had made it her personal mission to secure a marriage alliance with Vincenzo, seeing herself as the rightful queen of his empire. And she despised anything she deemed beneath her, which included the household staff, but most particularly, Bianca. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when the fragile illusion of Bianca's safety began to shatter. She was kneeling in the grand foyer, polishing the base of a massive bronze statue, when the heavy oak doors banged open. Vincenzo strode in, his dark overcoat soaked with rain, flanked by his top lieutenants. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. Dragged behind the men was a bleeding, terrified associate who had been caught selling Bruno shipping manifests to a rival crew in Brooklyn. Bianca froze, pressing herself against the statue, hoping her bulky uniform would blend into the shadows. Usually, punishments were dealt with in the soundproof basement. Today, Vincenzo was too enraged to wait. Lorraine stepped out of the drawing room, a crystal glass of bourbon in her slender hand, watching the violence unfold with a look of mild amusement. Vincenzo did not yell. He never yelled. He simply walked over to the traitor, pulled a heavy, suppressed pistol from his holster, and ended the problem. The muffled crack echoed through the cavernous foyer, followed by the heavy thud of the body hitting the pristine marble floor. Blood pooled rapidly, staining the white stone a brilliant, horrifying crimson. The lieutenants stepped back. Lorraine took a slow sip of her drink, and then, in the suffocating silence, Vincenzo turned his head. His eyes locked directly onto the shadows where Bianca was hiding. He knew she was there. He had known the whole time. "Come here," Vincenzo commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the force of a physical blow. Bianca forced her shaking legs to move. She stepped out of the shadows, keeping her chin tucked, playing the part of the terrified, clumsy maid. She clutched her polishing rag to her chest, her breathing shallow. "Clean it up," he ordered, his icy eyes dissecting every inch of her. Lorraine scoffed, stepping closer. "Really, Vincenzo? You are going to trust this rolling catastrophe to handle syndicate business?" She is too fat to even reach the floor without losing her breath. Look at her shaking. She will probably faint. Bianca felt the familiar sting of the insult, but she swallowed it down. She had endured worse pain than the biting words of a spoiled mob princess. Without a word, she walked to the supply closet, retrieved a bucket of bleach, heavy-duty sponges, and industrial trash bags. She returned to the center of the room, dropping to her knees beside the lifeless body. She did not gag. She did not scream. She methodically began to clean. Her movements were precise, efficient, and deeply practiced. She knew exactly how to lift the stains from porous stone. She knew how to avoid smearing the blood. She worked with a quiet, grim resilience that defied the soft, vulnerable appearance of her body. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the foyer was the rhythmic scrubbing of Bianca's sponge. When she finally stood up, the marble was spotless. She picked up her heavy bucket, keeping her eyes cast downward. "Well done," Vincenzo murmured. Lorraine rolled her eyes in disgust, turning on her heel and marching back into the drawing room. But Vincenzo did not move. He stepped directly into Bianca's path, forcing her to halt. He was so close she could smell the rain, gun oil, and dark cedar clinging to his clothes. "You did not flinch," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Normal girls scream, Bianca. They cry. They run. You cleaned up a murder like you were wiping spilled milk off a kitchen counter." "I just do my job, Mr. Bruno," Bianca replied, her voice soft, trying to step around him. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gripping her upper arm. His touch was firm, inescapable, but surprisingly gentle. It sent a jolt of pure electricity straight down her spine. He leaned down, his lips grazing her ear. "I have been watching you, little ghost," Vincenzo whispered. "You think that oversized uniform hides you. You think pretending to be slow and stupid keeps you safe. But I see the way you watch my men. I see the intelligence burning behind those eyes. You are hiding something in my house, and I am going to tear you apart until I find out exactly what it is." He released her arm, turning away to join his men. Bianca stumbled back to the servant quarters, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her cover was cracking. The most dangerous man in New York had his sights set on her, and she knew that once Vincenzo Bruno locked onto a target, he never let go. For the next 3 weeks, the Bruno estate turned into a psychological war zone. Vincenzo's obsession with Bianca became an undeniable, terrifying reality. He altered his schedule to cross paths with her. If she was assigned to clean the library, he would cancel his meetings to sit in the leather armchair, drinking scotch and watching her every move. He stopped letting the other maids serve his meals. Only Bianca was permitted to bring him his coffee or his dinner. His men noticed. The quiet murmurs started in the barracks. The ruthless Don, a man who could have any supermodel or actress in the city, was fixated on the quiet, plus-sized Maid with no makeup and a messy bun. Lorraine Sterling noticed too, and her amusement quickly turned into violent, toxic jealousy. Lorraine was not used to being ignored, especially not for someone she considered inferior. She began going out of her way to torment Bianca. She would deliberately knock over expensive vases and force Bianca to clean up the shattered glass. She would leave lit cigarettes burning on mahogany tables, smiling cruelly as Bianca rushed to put them out. Through it all, Bianca maintained her facade. She absorbed the abuse, channeling her deep, hidden strength. She reminded herself of who she really was and what she had survived. A few broken vases and cruel words were nothing compared to the flames that had consumed her past. But staying calm was becoming impossible with Vincenzo's heavy, possessive presence suffocating her. The breaking point arrived on the night of the syndicate's annual summit. The compound was flooded with capos, soldiers, and rival bosses. Bianca was tasked with servicing the upper floors, ordered to stay out of sight. She was pushing her cart down the dimly lit hallway of the West Wing when a hand darted out, grabbing a fistful of her hair and dragging her into an empty guest room. Bianca gasped as she was slammed hard against the wall. Lorraine Sterling stood in front of her, her face contorted with ugly rage. In her hand, she held a sharp silver letter opener, its tip pressed dangerously close to Bianca's throat. "Listen to me, you pathetic, bloated cow!" Lorraine hissed, her breath reeking of expensive champagne. "I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing with Vincenzo, but it ends tonight. You are a cleaner, a peasant. You are dirtying the air I breathe. You are going to pack your miserable bags and walk out the back gates tonight, or I will carve you up and tell Vincenzo I caught you stealing." Bianca stared at the silver blade. The old instincts, the ones she had spent years burying, flared to life. Her hands twitched. She knew exactly how to disarm Lorraine. A swift strike to the wrist, a pivot of her heavy hips, and Lorraine would be on the floor with her own blade against her neck. But doing so would reveal her combat training. It would reveal she was not just a maid. Before Bianca could make a choice, the heavy oak door of the bedroom was kicked open with such explosive force it splintered off its hinges. Vincenzo stood in the doorway, an avatar of pure, unadulterated violence. His eyes were completely black with fury. He did not speak. He crossed the room in two massive strides, his hand shooting out to wrap around Lorraine's throat. He lifted the polished Mafia princess entirely off the ground, slamming her against the opposite wall. The letter opener clattered uselessly to the floor. Lorraine gasped, her manicured hands clawing at Vincenzo's iron grip, her legs kicking in the air. "If you ever," Vincenzo said, his voice a demonic, vibrating growl, "touch what belongs to me again, I will mail your head back to Boston in a cardboard box. Do you understand me?" Lorraine choked out a desperate, terrified sound of agreement. Vincenzo dropped her in a heap on the floor. "Get out of my house," he ordered. "The alliance is dead. If you are not off my property in 5 minutes, you never leave it." Lorraine scrambled to her feet, weeping in terror, and fled the room. Bianca stood paralyzed, rubbing her bruised scalp. Vincenzo turned to her, his chest heaving, the violence still radiating from his skin. He closed the distance between them, his massive hands reaching out to cup her soft cheeks. His thumbs brushed over her skin. His touch, so achingly gentle, it made her want to weep. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes frantically searching her face. "No," Bianca whispered, her voice trembling. "You just started a war with Boston over a maid." "You are not a maid," he said smoothly. "And I do not care about Boston. I care about you." Before she could process his words, Vincenzo grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the room. He dragged her down the hall, past the bewildered guards, and straight toward his private office in the East Wing, the nerve center of his empire. No one was allowed in this room, except his underboss. Vincenzo threw the heavy vault-like doors open and pulled her inside, slamming it shut behind them and locking the deadbolt. The office was massive, dominated by a huge mahogany desk and a heavily carved, high-backed leather chair. It was his throne. He pulled her towards the chair and pushed her down into the soft leather. Bianca tried to stand up, panic finally breaking through her calm exterior, but Vincenzo grabbed a set of heavy, velvet-lined steel restraints from the desk drawer. In one fluid motion, he secured her left wrist to the reinforced iron armrest of the chair. The lock clicked with a chilling finality. "What are you doing?" Bianca cried out, tugging at the restraint. "Let me go!" "I cannot do that," Vincenzo said, leaning over her, his hands gripping the armrests, caging her completely in his imposing shadow. "You are a flight risk. You have been looking for an exit for weeks. I saw you copying the security codes at the perimeter gate. I saw you packing a go bag under your bed." Bianca's blood ran cold. He had seen everything. "You thought I just wanted to sleep with you," he continued, his voice dropping low, rich, and vibrating with dark obsession. "You thought I was just a bored boss playing with the help. But I see you, little ghost. I saw the way you sized up my men. I saw the combat stance you took right before I kicked that door in. Lorraine was about to lose an eye, and you were going to snap her wrist." "I do not know what you are talking about," Bianca lied, her chest heaving, the fabric of her uniform straining as she pulled against the chain. "I am just Bianca Rizzo." Vincenzo reached up, his fingers gently pulling the pins out of her messy bun, letting her dark, heavy hair fall over her shoulders. He leaned in, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "Bianca Rizzo died of pneumonia in an orphanage 20 years ago," Vincenzo whispered, sending a shock wave of terror straight through her heart. "You bought her identity off a forger in Seattle. It took my best hackers a month to bypass the firewalls you set up. But they finally found the truth. They finally found the ghost who escaped the Chicago massacre." Bianca stopped breathing. The world spun. Vincenzo pressed a kiss to her temple, his arms wrapping around her soft, trembling waist, claiming her as he whispered her secret name. "Welcome to your new home, Caterina Falcone. You are never running again." The name echoed in the cavernous office, a phantom summoned from the ashes of a life Bianca Rizzo had buried a decade ago. Caterina Falcone, the sole surviving heir of the Chicago Falcone family, a syndicate wiped off the map in a single night of fire and led by the Marchetti cartel. Bianca stopped struggling against the velvet-lined steel cuff, anchoring her to the mahogany armrest. Her breath hitched, her rounded chest rising and falling rapidly under the coarse fabric of her grey Maid uniform. The clumsy, invisible servant vanished, replaced by the lethal stillness of a woman raised by wolves. "You do not know what you are talking about," Bianca said, her voice dropping the soft, submissive pitch she had faked for years. It was cold, flat, and hollow. Vincenzo leaned closer, his massive frame trapping her against the soft leather of his chair. He reached out, his knuckles grazing the soft curve of her jaw, his touch reverent but completely unyielding. "I know that the Marchettis put a $5 million bounty on a ghost," Vincenzo murmured, his ice-blue eyes scanning every inch of her face. I know you walked across the country, erasing your fingerprints, buying a dead girl's identity, and hiding your tactical training behind the mask of a terrified, plus-sized cleaner. You gained weight, you wore clothes 3 sizes too big, and you scrubbed floors so no one would look at your face long enough to recognize the missing Falcone princess. Bianca clenched her free hand into a fist. Why chain me, then? If you know who I am, you know I can break a man's windpipe in under 3 seconds. Are you going to sell me to Chicago, Vincenzo? The temperature in the room plummeted. Vincenzo's eyes darkened, a flash of pure, territorial rage crossing his features. He brought his face mere inches from hers, his breath hot against her lips. If anyone from Chicago steps foot in New York looking for you, I will bury them under the foundation of this estate, he growled. I did not chain you to hand you over, Katerina. I chained you because you were going to run, and I cannot let you do that. You belong here. With me. He reached into his tailored vest, pulling out a small silver key. He slid it into the lock of the steel cuff. With a sharp click, the restraint fell open. Bianca immediately snatched her wrist back, rubbing the skin, her eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany doors. You are free to walk out that door, Vincenzo said, stepping back to give her space, though his posture remained coiled and ready. But outside these walls you are hunted. Lorraine just left this compound humiliated. She is a venomous snake, and she will reach out to my enemies. She will reach out to Chicago. If you run now, you fight them alone. Stay, and the entire Bruno Syndicate becomes your personal shield. Bianca slowly stood from the throne. She looked at the towering, ruthless Mafia Boss. He was offering her an empire. He was offering her safety. But more terrifying than that, he was offering her a place where she did not have to hide anymore. Why? Bianca asked, her voice steady. You are a businessman, Vincenzo. There is no profit in starting a war with the Marchettis over a maid. Vincenzo stepped forward, his large hands settling firmly on her wide hips, his thumbs pressing into the soft curves she had spent years trying to conceal. Because you are my match, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. I do not want a fragile socialite like Lorraine. I want the woman who can scrub blood off my floor without blinking. I want the woman who calculates the trajectory of a sniper rifle while dusting my chandeliers. I want my queen. Before Bianca could process the intoxicating weight of his words, a deafening explosion shattered the quiet of the night. The heavy glass windows of Vincenzo's office rattled in their frames. The distant wail of the perimeter alarms began to scream across the Hudson Valley estate. Bianca's combat instincts, dormant for a decade, roared to life. She instantly dropped to a low crouch, moving away from the windows, her eyes sweeping the room for improvised weapons. Vincenzo was already at his desk, punching a code into a biometric safe. The heavy steel door slid open, revealing an arsenal. Lorraine, Vincenzo said, his voice devoid of panic, replaced entirely by lethal calculation. She did not go back to Boston. She must have tipped off the Marchetti scouts lingering in the city. They hit the front gates. Bianca stood up, stripping off the drab grey apron that had been her prison for 3 years. She unbuttoned the top of her restrictive uniform, allowing herself to breathe, her lush figure no longer something to hide, but a vessel of raw power. She walked over to the safe, bypassing the handguns, and pulled out a sleek, suppressed tactical submachine gun. She checked the chamber, her movements fluid, precise, and deadly. Vincenzo watched her, a dark, primal smirk spreading across his face. "Let us go defend our house, Katerina," he said, racking the slide of his own weapon. The Bruno estate had turned into a slaughterhouse. Smoke choked the grand hallways, and the staccato rhythm of automatic gunfire echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The Marchetti hitmen, tipped off and heavily armed, had breached the first floor, catching the Bruno guards in a brutal crossfire. Bianca moved through the shadows of the East Wing like a phantom. She was no longer the clumsy maid who kept her eyes downcast. She was Caterina Falcone, and the blood of a Mafia dynasty pumped through her veins. Her soft, plus-sized frame gave her a deceptive momentum. She used her low center of gravity to pivot around marble pillars, taking out two heavily armed intruders with surgical, silenced headshots before they even knew she was there. Vincenzo moved parallel to her, a titan of violence, clearing the corridor with ruthless efficiency. He did not issue her orders. He did not try to shield her like a helpless civilian. He fought with her, their movements a synchronized, deadly dance. Every time Bianca dropped a target, Vincenzo covered her flank. He was witnessing the true Caterina, and his obsession was only deepening with every empty magazine she dropped to the floor. They reached the grand foyer, the same pristine marble floor Bianca had scrubbed weeks ago. Standing near the shattered front doors, surrounded by a dozen armed Marchetti soldiers, was Lorraine Sterling. Lorraine looked unhinged, her expensive designer coat covered in drywall dust, clutching a silver-plated pistol. She had guided the Chicago hitmen through the security blind spots. "Kill them!" Lorraine shrieked, pointing her weapon at the balcony where Vincenzo and Bianca had just emerged. "Kill the Don and bring me the fat maid!" The foyer erupted in gunfire. Vincenzo grabbed Bianca by the waist, pulling her behind a massive bronze statue as bullets chipped away the stone. "You take the left flank, I take the right," Vincenzo shouted over the deafening noise. "We funnel them toward the center." Bianca nodded. She slid a fresh magazine into her weapon. She did not feel fear. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of her past finally lifting off her shoulders. She broke cover, sliding across the polished floor, her weapon tracking with terrifying speed. She fired in short, controlled bursts. 3 Marchetti men dropped before they could readjust their aim. Vincenzo emerged from the opposite side, his heavy pistol roaring as he eliminated the rest of the vanguard. Within 90 seconds, the grand foyer was dead quiet, save for the groans of the dying and the ringing in their ears. Lorraine stood alone in the center of the room, her silver pistol shaking in her hands. The men she had brought to conquer the Bruno syndicate were bleeding out on the marble. Vincenzo stepped out from the shadows, his face a mask of cold, unadulterated fury. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Lorraine's chest. "No," Bianca said softly, stepping in front of Vincenzo's line of sight. She lowered her own weapon and handed it to Vincenzo. She walked slowly down the sweeping grand staircase. Lorraine aimed her shaking gun at Bianca, her face twisted in a mixture of terror and revulsion. "Stay back!" Lorraine screamed. "You are nothing! You are a pathetic, ugly maid!" Bianca did not stop. She closed the distance, her posture radiating an apex predator's confidence. She used her presence, and her absolute lack of fear to back the Boston princess into a corner. Lorraine pulled the trigger. The click of an empty chamber echoed in the silent room. She had fired all her rounds into the walls in her panic. Bianca moved with blinding speed. She grabbed Lorraine's wrist, twisting it sharply. Lorraine shrieked as the silver gun clattered to the floor. Bianca stepped into the socialite's personal space, using her weight to pin Lorraine effortlessly against the cold stone pillar. "My name is Caterina Falcone," Bianca whispered, her voice dark and absolute. "And you are trespassing in my home." Bianca delivered a single, devastating strike to Lorraine's jaw. The Boston heir crumpled to the floor, completely unconscious. The compound was secured. Sirens wailed in the distance as the remaining Bruno forces mopped up the surviving attackers outside. Bianca stood over the unconscious woman, her chest heaving. She felt a heavy, warm presence behind her. Vincenzo wrapped his massive arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent over the smell of gunpowder and smoke. "You saved my men," Vincenzo murmured, his hands tracing the soft, generous curve of her stomach, making no effort to hide his absolute worship of her body. "You defended my home. You are exactly who I knew you were." Bianca leaned back against him, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving behind a profound, terrifying sense of belonging. "I cannot hide anymore, Vincenzo," she said quietly. "Chicago will know I am alive. The whole underworld will know." "Let them know," Vincenzo rumbled, turning her around in his arms. He lifted her chin, forcing her to look into his ice-blue eyes, which were now burning with a fierce, protective fire. "Let the Commission know. Let Boston and Chicago know. The Falcone family is not dead. It just merged with the Bruno syndicate." He bent down and captured her lips in a bruising, possessive kiss. It was a promise signed in blood and smoke. Bianca melted into his embrace, her hands tangling in his dark hair. The days of the invisible, terrified Maid were over. Vincenzo swept her off her feet, cradling her heavy, soft curves against his chest as easily as if she weighed nothing. He carried her away from the carnage, up the grand staircase, and straight back to his office. He did not chain her to the throne this time. He sat down in the heavy leather chair and pulled her onto his lap, pulling her firmly against his chest. Bianca rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers tracing the collar of his ruined shirt. She looked out at the burning estate, no longer a captive, no longer a ghost. She was Caterina Falcone, the ruthless queen of the East Coast, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Thank you so much for experiencing this dark, high-stakes mafia romance with us. If Caterina and Vincenzo's intense journey kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share this story with your fellow dark romance readers. We would love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and tell us your favorite moment. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for more gritty, thrilling underworld tales.